I hope you all had a good Thanksgiving. Now, it's time to get serious for the last few weeks. Today, what I'm going to cover are two topics. Actually, let's see where my notebook went. Okay. We are going to do Bayesian learning or Bayesian machine learning. Bayesian machine learning is a topic that historically people have found difficult to understand because of the underlying mathematics and because of the shift from conventional thinking that it entails. We did Bayesian learning, if some of you remember, in the engineering math class. How many of you attended Bayesian learning in the engineering math class? Almost all of you have. So for those of you who haven't, today would be a rather quick introduction to it. So I'll lay down the tenets of Bayesian learning in the beginning. I will talk today about certain crucial probability distributions that show up in Bayesian learning over and over again. Right. And these probability distributions are important. Those of you who are taking engineering math with me now will realize that I'll also be covering it with a different emphasis in the engineering math class. So a repetition, I suppose, would help you there. We'll learn about that. And we'll give today to it. Today, there won't be labs, even though it's data sets. Today, we will not have a lab in data. We will have a lab in something else. Guess what you think we'll have lab in? In English writing. Technical writing. Today is the day you will do storyboarding, storytelling, narrative, and you'll write your first blog, technical blog. You will not go out today without each team having written at least one good technical blog. Are we together? And each individual having a sketch, an outline of a blog, technical blog. See, when you do technical writing, see, a technical blog is sort of a hybridization of a narrative, of a personal narrative with a technique and a technical paper. Like suppose you write a technical article. It tends to be very impersonal. It tends to follow, if you remember, the format IMRC, Introduction, Method, Results, Conclusion. When you hybridize it with a narrative style, what you get is a good technical blog. Right? And it brings in a human element, a human touch to it. It reduces the formality of it. And you end up, but the idea is to preserve the clarity of a technical article, the lucidity and clarity and rigor of a technical article, not compromise on that, but at the same time, make it more approachable, make it more human, right? Bring in a narrative quality. We'll learn the art of doing that collectively. Right? Now, while I do feel quite confident and competent, I suppose, at machine learning and technical subjects, I too am an engineer like you. So when it comes to technical writing, the narrative aspects of it, we have written technical articles, but when it comes to the narrative style, as a disclaimer, I of course don't claim to be an expert at it, at writing, at narrative writing and so forth. I'm by no means a writer, a recognized writer or anything, or even a professional writer of narratives and so forth. So whatever we do, I am just a person who has a little bit more experience than you, but is not necessarily an expert at this. So we'll all do it together. We'll make head and tail out of it. So that is that. So that will be the scope of our work, guys. Now, we can do one of two things. I could, when your minds are fresh, I could first talk to the technical writing aspect of it. Your mind is fresh, lay the footprints of that. How would you go about doing it? What's the approach? It's a process. It is not so easy that you, like school essay, you sit down and in 1 hour you have written an essay. Right? You have to have an approach, or at least I'll teach you what approach I have, which I'm sure that professional writers may consider fairly rudimentary, but it does work for me. right? I could do that, and then break up today, get you guys started, and then somewhere later, come back and do the probability theory in 2-3 hours. Because the reason that may be a good approach is there are some people who are still coming. The weather has been terrible, storm and so forth. And today we started the class late because of that, right? I noticed that we are still at little more than half the class. We are 2/3 of the class here. 10 people, more than 10 people are still missing. So we can defer the technical by about an hour and a half. Is that okay, guys? Right? So that they benefit from the technical. In the morning, while our minds are fresh, and probabilities are probabilities, we'll do those in due course of time. But let's focus on the technical aspect of it. Just to give you a roadmap, today I will just lay enough technical foundations for the Bayesian. I will recommend then some articles to read on your own. You can do it here, but I would suggest that today you give completely to writing. You read it during the week at your time, so that next time when I go and bring the Bayesian labs and explain the rest of the Bayesian theory, you're completely ready for it. Are we together? Bayesian takes time to grasp. And I'll just give you the highlights on how it differs from normal thinking. You guys have been with me for a long time. Those of you who do engineering math already have seen me take you through it. But now it will be, from a very practical perspective, we'll use Bayesian to solve real-world problems, real-world data sets, Pi, MCMC, STAN, right? Winbugs and so forth. These are frameworks to do Bayesian analysis in a very elegant way. They are languages, in a way there are many languages, domain-specific languages, STAN, etc., and frameworks to do things. We'll use those. Right? So we'll keep that for next time, and we'll make progress like that. So all right, guys, so that's the scope. Today, let me ask this question from you. So what is the goal today? Today's goal is we'll come out with at least the first draft, a full draft, of a technical article in which, leaving aside the actual code and visualizations that you produce, the English verbiage that you would have produced as a team, that you would have written, I expect it to be no less than 5,000 words. All right? Now, 5,000 words is, a page has what? Typical 100 lines? 50 lines? Right? 80 lines, right? Approximately 80 lines. And a line has approximately 60 words. 66 is supposed to be the gold standard, right? In typography, 66 is supposed to be, like LaTeX tries to achieve 66. The one line is how many words per line? No, characters, sorry. 66 characters, yes, sorry. I apologize, 66 characters, yeah. So about 810, right? So which means that 80 times, yeah, 60 times, yeah. So you will end up writing a few thousand words, right? You'll be writing, in a page there are, 60 lines times, let's say, 6 words, or 8 words per line. 67, let's take it 7, 42. So 420 words per page, isn't it? Let's say 500 words per page. Small print is 600 words per page. Yeah, let's take, medium. Let's take 500 words per page. And at 500 words per page, if you are writing 5,000, you are looking at a 10-page write-up. 10-page write-up, I'm sure that your kids will just, if they are given a 10-page write-up, they won't even think about it. They'll just sit down, do it, and next day submit it in the school, isn't it? Right? So it's not that arduous, but for us it will be a little bit arduous because we are out of practice about writing and we'll learn to write. So are we clear about the goals for today? We'll write a first technical blog, the draft, and what will happen is, as you write it, I want you to keep committing it. And today, I'll be very actively involved. I'll be coming to your room and giving you guidance on what is the structure of a technical article, and so on and so forth. Are we together? So let me start with two core things that I'll talk about. I said that a blog is made up of, a good technical blog is a hybrid of two of IMRC. Article, Narrative writing. Are we together? There are things that I like about, I like to, this is personal. Again, as I said, I'm not an expert in writing, obviously. We are all engineers. So just consider today's exercise as a one-eyed leading the blind or something like that. Right? Nothing better than that. Or a blind leading the blind is probably more appropriate. I'm sure that the humanities people would mock at us. But for whatever it is, here's my way of looking at it. In writing, the one thing that is relevant is a voice. What does a voice mean in writing? Can anybody tell? That's grammar. Yes. So you can choose an active and passive. And in general, you prefer active voice these days. Right? Passive, we grew up in the old British style, so passive used to be emphasized. I just used a passive voice. So, but no, today we prefer an active voice in writing. Not that. And it just shows our technical roots. The moment we see a word, we immediately look for its technical definition. What is a voice in writing? Kate? Storytelling? Yes, that's what it is. That is close. Anybody else would like to say? Storytelling is part of it, but not. What is a voice? People often think it's opinion. So suppose I voice very, very strong opinions in favor of our great and brilliant leader. Would that be a voice? Not necessarily. For example, in Twitter you find a statement like, "Yay, great man." Is that a voice? Is the opinion for sure, but is that a voice? That is balance, right? That is balance and perspective. So I'll put that. That goes to balance. But what goes to voice? What is voice? Message of is the burden, is sort of the burden or the, yeah, I can say burden, goal, message. That I can write to, but that's not what the voice is. One second, yeah, go ahead. Surface something latent, right? That goes to insight, right? Every narrative, every good thing. See, at the end of it, and that word is very important, because why would I read your article? At the end of the article, if all I learned is what I already knew, or just some facts, which I'll forget. You know that we forget facts. Then that article was a waste of time. Think about it, right? How many of you love reading reference, tables of things? For example, the log table. It is the quintessence of facts, isn't it? But that doesn't give you value. You'll forget it. At the same time, if you read something and you learn nothing new, you don't get it. So when you read an article, implicitly, there is a contract. There is a good faith contract between you and the writer, that the writer has something of insight to convey, and you will pick up those gems. He has some gems to offer, some insights to offer. If you don't have that, obviously the time is wasted. So it goes to insight. It's a good thing that you need. But what is voice? I still haven't gotten that. Yes. It's perspective. Was that? Yeah, it's sort of the hardest thing to quantify, but I'll just speak to that for a moment. So we have spoken. See, I spoke of voice, but we came out with all these important things. An article must have balance. What does that balance mean? Pros and cons, or many sides. Sometimes it's not just two sides. What happens is the most important thing in any scientific journey is that it is always incomplete. Right? Indeed, actually, I would like to quote the somewhat related, a profound result, Gödel's incompleteness theorem. Gödel's incompleteness theorem, is one of its popular interpretations is that it says that scientific knowledge inherently will never be complete. It will forever remain incomplete. Right? It's a pretty profound statement. It's a mathematical statement. It's a theorem. So we can go on in scientific journey of scientific discovery, but there is no truth with a capital T that we can come to that is the ultimate destination, knowing which we know everything. Inherently we cannot, right? So there's an incompleteness to it. But more prosaic, in a more prosaic way, when we write something, when we do any body of work, you know that you have solved a part of the problem, right? There is a mountain of what we know. There is a vast amount of what we don't know. We have all, in some ways, sort of clawed at the unknown and shed light on it for some part. In some part of the unknown, some part that we don't understand, we have brought the light of understanding through our analysis. Right? So when we present that, there are always loose ends. There are always imperfections and blemishes to our own analysis. So it is the mark of a good scientist to be the most self-critical, to be his own most vocal critique, most objective critique. A good scientific work should express what has been done, but also express in all the ways that that work remains incomplete or defective. Right? To criticize your own work is a mark of integrity in science. You must have that. And we will practice that. A good blog at some point, I mean, not a good blog, but a good technical article, good writing, always should critique itself, its results. Right? So that goes sort of to the balance. What has been done, what has not been done. What other people have done better. What other approaches have done better. Right? And in a journey like data science, as you know, you apply some algorithm, but there are many algorithms you didn't apply. There are things that other people have done very well using their approaches. You have to weigh their results next to your results, right? And show that they too have done incredible work. In some ways you're better than them. In some other ways they outweigh you. Right? So people know how to use your stuff. It is very important that we do that. Are we together? So that's to the balance. What is the burden? Burden is, at the end of it, think of yourself that whenever you write an article, especially that is not just a pure article, technical article, but even in a technical article, one metaphor that I have is that you are a boatsman on a river, ferrying people across. Where are you taking them? Right? Where are you taking them? If you are a tour guide, where are you taking them? People have put their trust and their time in reading your article, and and it's hard to read technical articles. It's far easier to watch, I don't know, humorous soap opera or some TV show or something, right? So they are putting in their effort and their faith in you. Where do they end up? You need to have a clear goal where they end up and justify to yourself that where you have taken them was worthwhile. Isn't it? Yes, exactly. Yes. So that is important, guys. This is the burden, the message. At the end of it, right? And in a way, you can say that is the last thing you write, but that's your abstract. You promise that this is where I'm taking you. As a tour guide, you say, I'm taking you to a tour of San Francisco, right, where you'll see these things and so on and so forth, right? There's a marvelous thing, there's a Golden Gate, whatever it is, and these are things. That becomes it. Insight, we spoke. What is insight? Insight is that which you offer. Ask yourself, what is it that you offer to an audience, to the reader, that he couldn't have just already picked up somewhere else? Does that make sense, guys? We all, now you may say, well, I'm not a big genius. I'm just starting out in this subject. What in the world could I have to offer? It's not like that. You do have, and that goes back to voice, and I'll talk about that. See, what happens is knowledge is infinite, right? But yet, vast amount of knowledge remains inaccessible. Why does it remain inaccessible, especially this technical knowledge? If knowledge is all freely available, it's there. Why is it that we are not all equally learned? Because, amongst other things, we don't have time. Then, not only that, the expression of that knowledge is often at the level of technical complexity that is not accessible to us, isn't it? That limits us. Or if either it is written in too hard a way, we can't understand, find it too hard, or it is in too easy a way, and in that case, you spend a lot of time reading the obvious, isn't it? You waste time. So what do we want? At each time we want to read an article that is within our means of within our, reach of comprehension, isn't it? But at the same time, takes us along as fast as we can, right? Doesn't go too slow, doesn't go too fast, is not too... You realize that. But the moment you realize that therefore, from a given body of knowledge, to each individual, given the fact that body of knowledge may still be the same, but each individual is different. And there is a different journey from the knowledge to the individual that takes the individual to the knowledge back, isn't it? And that is the core of, I would argue that has been the core of my teaching. Like, do I believe I'm the best expert in machine learning and AI? By no stretch of imagination. I'm just maybe 1 or 2 steps ahead of you. Right? After all these years, I still feel that I know almost nothing in this field. Right? And there are people who have vast amounts of knowledge. But I do have a faith in myself that I can look at people, look at their faces, look at how well they understand. Look at each person, and to me, each person therefore becomes a journey. When I talk, when I speak, I'm not speaking to the abstract. I'm speaking to you people. I know who you are, and I know how I can take you there. Are we together? Right? It's very much like, when you join a running club, you get a guy who is a super athlete and says, all right, today we are going to run the marathon. And people like me immediately look for the exit, right? But then comes a guy who's more seasoned, and he says, today we have a great goal. We'll walk around the block. And then people like me say, yay, right? Next week he says, okay, we're going to jog around the block. And things like that, small progress. So you take a person from where you are. But the same thing is our article, guys. Writing is, in a subtle way, the narrative, the explanation, the explanatory aspect of the narrative, which is and it's very interesting. It is a mix of different writings. Explanatory aspect is very context aware, very audience aware. Are you together? Right? So for example, if you're talking to Einstein and you start by saying, okay, let me first what a vector is. And he'll be like, am I in the right place? You realize that, right? So it is a mismatch of audience. The point is, and that is the gist of it, if explanatory writing, and to the extent that technical articles are explanatory writing, is essentially has a component of didactics, of teaching to it. The primary question is, who are you teaching to? Isn't it? So that is, who are you? The who becomes the very, very important thing. And it is the first thing you should think of, guys. Right? It is very common, I notice, for engineers to write something, but quite often they're explaining it to themselves. Right? And that is why engineers have made terrible... See, here's the thing. We build products. And it is a measure of how poor we are at explaining it, that all companies have a documentation team, which has not a single engineer in it. Those are people with English backgrounds. And they struggle to understand, what in the world did you make? Somehow they figure it out and they explain it. And you can't explain your own product. Right? Why? Because we are, we talk like we are a cabal. We just talk within the cabal. Right? And we hardly able to explain even to each other what we have done. Right? So we need to break that. you need to first start with the who. Are we together? The who is important. But then there is a certain sense of persuasion. Persuasion. I hope I spelled that right. Persuasion. What is persuasion? It is subtle, right? You're not doing a political campaign. But the going gets tough. Whenever people read a technical article, you realize that most of us have given up on articles after 1 or 2 pages. How many of you have had that experience? You feel it's very good, but then 1, 2 pages later you begin to give up. Isn't it? So persuasion is actually a subtle thing, and I feel it's poorly emphasized in technical writing. Persuasion is a subtle persuasion to the reader all along. A persuasion to stay engaged, not give up. To say there is something more interesting coming and you can get it. Are we together? So in other words, don't make the ramp up so steep that people feel like giving up. Have a persuasive quality that they are understanding, that they are making progress. What does that mean? To the reader, just as in the classroom, you need to have a sense of positive reinforcement. It may be very overt, great that you got it, or something like that. But it could be very subtle, right? And you can say that, for example, and that's a milestone. Right? And that's a milestone. It's a very subtle positive feedback. You see that, right? Some way, you just in a very subtle way say, or just the way you end a section or with a visualization. And then you start the next one and say, now that we have reached this far, it makes the next step possible, or something like that. You know, these sentences, when we read in other people's articles, we may not pay attention to it, but today is the time to pay attention to it. Ask yourself, what made you like an article, and what made you ignore a lot of them, right? And I will recommend to you some of the great writings in our own field. One of them is obviously, there are many of them I can take examples of, right? Perhaps, I suppose all of you have read Martin Fowler's work. How many of you have read Martin Fowler? ThoughtWorks, right? So read his articles on anything like, test-driven development, whatever it is, some of his easier articles, and I'll give that as an assignment to you guys to just read it. That what should a good technical article look like? When you read some of these writings, you will see this, at least I infer or I see these things in those articles. Are we together? Right? There is a narrative, there's a flow of it. Those of you who read one of these Martin Fowler's, how many of you felt that there was a persuasive quality? It made you feel that you're learning something absolutely important and new and worth learning. Did you get that feeling? You get that feeling, right? So we will do that. So that's a persuasive aspect to that. Right? We will speak of that. Now that brings me back to, so who is important? Who are you talking to? Guys, decide that. Don't make a mix. Like, are you talking to the professor of the subject? Or are you talking to a friend? I would always suggest that you should, when you're writing, have the quality of writing as a letter that you're writing to a friend who has asked you to explain a thing. Or you're writing a letter to a friend in which you're just talking about it with excitement, with persuasion, that you have done something that is cool. Are we together? So that should be your approach. Think that you're writing to a close friend, to a childhood friend. And I have found that if you take that approach, if you personalize writing, writing flows. Or imagine that you're writing to your mother or something like that, whatever your favorite may be, your friend, your mother, your father, right, your brother, whatever it is, your sister. Or take that as your reference frame. And write with the person in mind. Always have a person in mind that you're writing to. And that person obviously should be, it's good to have a generalization of that. Obviously you know that it isn't just to your friend, but to also, the friend is a proxy for a group of people. Right? But it makes it very clear, very precise what your friend knows and doesn't know. Right? So it will focus your voice. Your level shouldn't change. Are we together? Your level of discourse shouldn't change, and that is important. So what would be a bad example of this level of discourse in an article? Yeah, you start with a joke and something very elementary, and then you say, and here is an equation, and there's a loss function written there. And you say in 2 lines, right, the momentum-based gradient of this obviously shows this, and it is not at all obvious, right, to the reader. So you lost it, because if you started very easily, you're catering to your friend, and suddenly you just made your friend feel really, really dumb, isn't it? You just hit him hard. You made him feel really dumb. And the first thing is, just as you would never do that to a friend, always be on the guard that are you changing your level in such a way that you're making your audience, your reader, your friend feel dumb? It's a very important question to ask, right? In fact, in teaching, it is the central question to ask, right? See, you realize, guys, that you all have been to meetups and conferences and so forth. How many of you have gone to a conference with great excitement that something great has been done, and a feeling that, yes, something great has been shown to me, but I am rather dumb. I didn't get most of it. How many of you felt that, or thoroughly dazzled and belittled at the same time, right? It is the nature of those presentations. That's why we don't go to learn from them. We then do discovery later on in the quiet of the night, in the night lamp. We sit and study the background work and make head and tail out of what has been done. Right? Why? Because the speaker, his purpose was to impress. Right? Was to impress, was not to share with you, even though that is supposed to be the purpose of conferences. There was a bit of sharing, but it was also a lot of dazzling. The one thing you should never do, and let me use the word never, is never try to impress in writing. Or in real life, of course. Right? Facts are facts. Let them speak for themselves. But your objective should be never to impress, never try to impress. Yes, not only that. To impress, you'll always belittle people. You realize that, right? In technical matters, when you try to impress, you'll end up belittling people around you, right? Making them feel small. Because if you are impressive, they are not. Isn't it, on that topic? Go ahead. Oh yes, simplicity. And again, excellent point that you brought in. Let me put his point here. I'll start another thing. Brevity, if I may quote, this is one of the hardest things. The wit here stands for intelligence, and it is a Shakespearean quote. Shakespeare said this: simplicity and brevity are the soul of wit. Which means that, and this is a process we go through. See, the way you write paragraphs, people think that I've written, or it looks good, grammatically also it's correct, I'm done. No. Here's what you do. You write, and then you ask yourself, how can I write it in half the words? Are we together? And you repeat, you keep on iterating, you simplify it. And it is not just reducing the amount of words, but you're also simplifying it. So you iterate through your paragraph again and again. See, a good paragraph, when a paragraph is good or well written, your reader will flow through it, will never realize how much hard work went into writing that paragraph. I don't know if that makes sense. Very counterintuitive. When you write a normal paragraph, right, people don't have the flow. They don't sort of easily flow through that. But a well-written paragraph is something that the reader will just zip through it smoothly. Right? But a well-written paragraph is a distillate of a lot of hard work. And it is never the first draft. Rarely. There's some great authors who are in, you also, in some moment of great inspiration, may write a perfect paragraph to begin with. But usually it doesn't happen. Right? Writing comes, good writing comes after you have written 1,000,000 words. Right? And each one of us have probably written 1,000,000 lines of code, but not 1,000,000 words. Isn't it? What's that? Not in a good way. Okay. Right. Yeah. And last of all, so is that don't do the following. Right. Some things not to do in writing is very important. Don't. No, I meant individually. No. Come on, we are all like. Okay, I won't say anymore. Okay. So see, guys. Yeah, you're right. People have different professions. I come from a more coding background, so obviously, but if you have different backgrounds, I mean, large number. Let's not use the word million, maybe 10,000, whatever it is. Whatever is a large number. We all certainly have more experience coding than writing. Would be a fair statement without putting a number to it. Right? That is right, and I'll come to that, the grammatical aspects, the technical aspects. So simplicity and brevity, right? We talked to that. Right? So repeat that simplicity and brevity. Your lines will sparkle after you have rewritten the paragraph a few times, right? And you know this thing, grammatical aspects like active versus passive voice, right? Generally prefer active voice. You notice that I use active voice with you most of the time. But I don't avoid the passive voice. I do use passive voice. For example, I say it is considered not a great idea to do this, or something like that. Right? So don't just be pure active. Some people have gotten overboard, and you can read their blogs, and it just feels like a personal conversation. He's talking directly to you. He will say, and let me tell you. That is in the face. In my view, I don't like reading those. Right? Because it's just like it's discourteous to say you, right? You don't do that. In the same way, it just your writing shouldn't have the feeling of talking directly in your face, kind of thing. Avoid that. Keep a decorum to the whole thing. So that is the simplicity aspect of it. The other thing is the abbreviation. Let me talk about that. Always have a glossary. Have a glossary. Have references. Now, references are not something that you consider as an afterthought. Most people, when they get into technical writing, references come through. By the way, is the voice coming through the speakers, or is it dead? It's coming through the speakers, right? Yeah, because the recording is going on. So we add, as in our lifetime, we will add a few grains of sand to a mountain of knowledge and scholarship and work that others have done, achievements of others, right? We just add a few grains of sand to it, to a giant mountain. You must refer to the mountain. Are we together? You must give the context, because people, whenever you're writing an article, there will be people who are not ready for that article, but nonetheless want to read it. And they have been told that your article is good and worth reading. You need to give them a ramp up. They should have the ability to go back and read the background material. It's called the background material, right? You must specify the background material. That is very important. And don't just Google it up in 5 minutes and throw this, that, or that references. See, your quality is reflected by the references you make, right? When you put random references or just the cliche references, you show that you are just run-of-the-mill. Paradoxically, when I read articles, you know how I start? I start with the abstract and the references, conclusion and references. I skip straight to that, from abstract to conclusions and references. And then I go back and start reading the introduction. It's an interesting way, because a reference gives me, what does a reference tell me by reading the references? It gives me a sense of the mountain on which a few grains of sand will be added by this paper. Right? This paper is doing something too. And then I ask myself, is this mountain something I'm even interested in at that particular moment, right? I thought this would be an interesting paper, but maybe it's too far from what I do. I can keep it off. Time is built. We have limited time. I can keep it off or I can read it now. So references matter, guys. But the other reason references matter very much is to contextualize your work. You have done something different from that guy and that guy, right? And you have built upon the work of that guy, right? You should say that. And above all things, any material you read that influenced you in any way, right? Any help you got or any thing that you must refer to it, right? It is a way of expressing gratitude. See, the day somebody refers to your article, cites your article, it is a thank you note to you. It's a vote for you. And citations in scholarly fields are counted, they're tracked. You can see how many citations this guy got and how many citations got. It is again all Google PageRank, etc., but in a more formal way. Are we together? So must have citations. That is it. So those are all of these things. Must have glossary, must have this, have abstract, and so forth. And obviously have a in technical articles, in blogs, technical articles, an abstract is very necessary. In blogs, here is one thing people do. It is, they still call it, it is the abstract, but it is not written as the abstract. What do they call it? No, TLDR. Yeah, right. They just use a more informal DR. Are we together? But do you notice that it is nothing but an abstract in disguise? A summary of your work in disguise. Yeah, it's a too long didn't read. Yeah, so too long didn't read. So that is it. So the idea is that these days, if you have a long form writing, and a technical blog tends to be a good technical blog tends to be a long form writing. Every long form writing should have a TLDR, a quicker version. Are we together? That's that. So with that, now I'll come back to voice. We still haven't addressed the voice part. Right? See, voice is you. Each of us, if I ask you to explain, let me just take something. Yes, go ahead. Too long didn't read. Is the abstract, is the new way of writing abstract. I mean, people, in informal writing, people will not use the word abstract. They will instead, so. Are we together? Let's take an example. Suppose you did. I'll give an example of an article that I just guided one of the interns here to do. Standard Wisconsin breast cancer data. So the project was not to do one more classifier on that. I asked the student as an intern to do this. It was an 11th grade high school student, Pranshu. So his project that I gave is demonstrate the no free lunch theorem using the Wisconsin data set and 2-3 other data set that I gave. I believe the California prices or something or the other, 3-4. So to show that, for this data set, so you make a matrix of data sets and how well each algorithm performed, accuracy of each algorithm. So what does that table show you? In a way, it's a very visual representation at the end of it of the no free lunch theorem. You see that for different data sets, different algorithms did well, right? So when you do that, what is the TLDR? What's the abstract, right? We confirm the no free lunch theorem by applying, right? We apply many algorithms to diverse data sets and confirm the validity of a no free lunch theorem. So as a TLDR, see, it is simple. It is a fairly informal writing. But if you really think about it, it is the abstract of a paper, right, of a technical article. So that's an example of a TLDR or a summary or something like that. So you must start with that, guys. Must start with that. All right? Then a picture is worth 1,000 words. Right? In a good technical writing, you just as a paragraph you iterate again and again, the visualization is not something you just write 4 lines of MATLAB and you show it. That shouldn't suffice. Now, those of you who took the Python class with me, you remember I taught you a particular way to make visualizations, high quality, print quality visualizations, incorporating LaTeX into your work. Right? So make sure your visualization, just as a paragraph you iterate over and over, your visualization you iterate over and over. Right? Make sure your visualizations are not just the first draft and you put it there. Right? So make it the clearest possible. And in visualization theory, the basic thing is, see, in many situations you can use a pie chart, bar chart, this, that. Which one should you use? Don't just use the prettiest of them all. Right? It's not a beauty contest. There are rules of which visualization is most appropriate for what thing. There are some standard rules. Just go with that. Right? And they are based upon human perception. What we perceive more than others. How well we perceive area versus the size of a line and things like that. So based on the perceptual things, there are certain rules of visualization. Follow that. Other rule of visualization, which is a no-brainer, is the minimum ink principle. Right? You should explain the most with the least ink. If you are putting 3D shading and, for example, a bar graph does not need a third dimension. It looks pretty, but it adds no value to it. It does not need a color gradient to it. That doesn't bring any value to it. Right? Keep it simple. It doesn't have to be ugly, but it has to be simple. But simplicity has an eternal ring to it, because that same graph 20 years later will still make sense. Whereas those cheesy, colorations that you put inside your graph, and you put a texture and all that to prettify it, 10 years later it looks rather hokey, isn't it? So don't do that. Remember, your articles should be something that can be still read 10 years later. Right? So that is the visualization aspect of it. And I'll stop here, and I'll come back now to the IMRC format in a moment. The voice. Let me, anyone would like to take a final stab at what is the voice in a writing? See, it's very hard to quantify what a voice is. But let me just say that a voice is something that comes to you, that is unique to you. But it comes even to you on a topic when you have really studied the topic deeply and felt passionately about it. Are we together? Right? So it is the opposite of impersonal. It is not so much an opinion. You may express the two people may have exactly the same opinion, but the voices are different. Voice is the human dimension, the quality that makes a writing live. It is partly good writing, partly the passion, the fire behind the writing. A writing without voice is useless. Right? If you cannot read this writing and say, aha, this is what Ashwin wrote. I know this is Ashwin. Right? Or you can say that, yes, Ashwin writes like this. Do you get that? It's a unique voice. It's a unique quality. People should read and know what it is. So, for example, they're obviously classic writing style. In a way, you can say almost a style of writing. But I don't know. I want to use a word different from style. It's a voice. It's the passion. It's the fire behind the writing. And trust me, guys, people think that technical writing is dry. Nothing could be further. Without fire, your writing, nobody will read. Right? You need to have that fire. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Hmm. Yes. Yes. Exactly. It gives you a deeper insight into things because the voice comes from deep understanding of the topic, not superficial Googling, right? And that voice is important, guys. The thread that runs through the beats of your articles must be a voice that forever, it's like in India we use the word sutra, right? That's sort of like the voice. Is the thread through all of them that captures a perspective, a force through all of them, right? You should develop a voice. How does a voice come? It's undefinable. It's one of the things for which there are no rules, but we develop it, right? So, for example, in literature, obviously, that's what they do, right? So great writers like Dickens, right? You can read a paragraph of Dickens, and Charles Dickens, which I'm assuming we all come from India, so we are familiar with Charles Dickens to a large extent. But is very different, for example, from, let's say, George Eliot, or very different from Tagore, Rabindranath Tagore. Tagore has a different voice, a completely different feeling, right? Dickens has a huge humanitarian aspect to it, and a certain voice. It is very Dickensonian to start a paragraph by saying, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times, and so forth, right? It's a very dramatic paragraph. And it captures you instantly, isn't it? And it starts very strongly, but interestingly, it ends very strongly. Anybody has read that line? It was the best of times. So take it as actually, why don't I do that? Take this as one of the task items. Read the first paragraph of Dickens, Tale of Two Cities. Right? Read the ending and think about it. Don't read it, study it. And look at the beginning and the ending. And how that paragraph is constructed. It's one of the most celebrated paragraphs in English literature. Read the last line of the same book, Tale of Two Cities. And in which, I can quote it to you, the line that starts with, "It is a far, far better life that I go to than I've ever known." Right? That line is there. Go read that paragraph. Right? And then it ends with the biblical quote, is the resurrection and the life, and so forth. So go read that, right? And reflect upon the sheer uniqueness of the voice, a personality that is saying that. And you would realize that other writers don't write like that. They don't speak like that, right? So that is, how do you become unique in that? And insightful, that is it. So that is on the narrative quality, guys. So now I'll speak broadly on the narrative aspect of it. See, narrative is to me, that word, obviously in schools you teach narration, right? You teach persuasive writing, explanatory writing, narrative writing. Narrative writing is often storytelling. That's how they do it. And I'll sort of take it like that, right? Now, what's a story? Or what has stories to do with technical writing? You would argue, right? Isn't technical writing all cut and dry, and here is a graph, and a procedure, an algorithm, and here is code? No. Actually, most of us don't love to read articles like that. If it was that we loved that more than our TV shows, all of us would be giant scholars, isn't it? And libraries would be filled with us showing up in the stacks, journal stacks. Doesn't. We don't read, those highly technical articles are published. Typically an article will have an audience of 20 people in the world who will read it, right? And everybody will know it's very solid work, it's a good achievement, and then those 20 people will applaud, and then it will be forgotten in the research stacks. It is a contribution to mankind, but we don't ever go back and read it with the same avid eagerness with which we watch our TV shows. And what it is missing is a narrative quality. Right? And I feel that's what makes a technical blog actually very nice, in the sense that it humanizes intellectual achievements. Right? So there's an old statement, a very profound statement. I wish I remember the author of that statement. Very well said. It says that See, if you ask a physicist, what is the world made up of? A scientist, engineer, what is the world made up of? Nisarg, what's the world made up of? Atoms. Atoms. Space, space-time. Particle, somebody would say elementary particles, space-time, light, whatever. Isn't it? Strings, energy, yes. Isn't it? See, any other answers? What's the world, what's the universe made up of? What's the stuff of the universe? Matter, energy. Of its basic atomic units, what's the most atomic unit of these? Maybe atoms, you would say, maybe superstrings, right? Maybe quarks, maybe elementary particles, and you can have your pick on what you would say. Isn't it? But an alternate perspective is that the world, when we look at the world as human beings, right, it is a relationship. We don't know what the world is actually. What we see is its interaction with us and our reaction to its interaction with us. The world is in a way a secretion of the human mind, right? How we react to the stimuli that we receive. And when we see things happen in the world, our first instinct is to explain, to narrate, to create a story, to say, yeah, the sun rises here and in the evening it will go there. So it goes like this. Isn't it? We always create narratives around and to look at the world. We cannot look at the world without narratives. So a very profound statement somebody made, and I don't know if the explanation what the author was thinking was like this, but this is mine, is that the world, and a very profound statement actually, the world is made up of not atoms, but stories. All around you, you look at, your mind has created a story. Right? You look at a friend, and what do you see there? You see all sorts of stories in your mind that my friend behaves like this and does like this, and I like him for this, and he has this good quality, and he irritates me like this, or he's very hardworking, he has achieved this, isn't it? Do you remember? Your notion of a friend is a bundle of stories. How many of you agree with that? Right? Isn't it? So stories, everything around you, your relationships are stories. Do you see that? Stories are the atom of the world. The world is made up of stories. Right? Your world, right? You, as looking out as a window into the world, are stories. So you are telling a story. Whenever you're saying something, you must be telling a story. Right? There is abundant research that shows that when you narrate something as stories, people remember because we share stories, right? If you look at it, the oldest invention of mankind has been stories. There is a reason why every country has very rich mythology, right? The Moses parting the sea, the Red Sea, very dramatic stories, right? As children, you read these stories of these great things, Ramayana and Mahabharata and all of these things, the great people of the world, the kings, the pharaohs, right, of Alexander. What are these? A lot of these are stories. Some of these are actually of very dubious factual reality. We will never really know, in my view, did somebody part the Red Sea with a stick, right? It seems to defy the logics of science. But nonetheless, look at that. And so as a scientist, you may be skeptical. But look at the tremendous nourishing quality of those stories. Those stories build giant personalities. They nourish children. Right? Your life would be impoverished if you did not have mythologies in it. So mythologies have been the vehicle through which we have conveyed our culture, our philosophy, right? Our wisdom, our insights from generation to generation. If we had written them as journal articles, they would have long been just faded out. It's common sense, isn't it? So narratives are important. If you say anything, say it as a story, because we all love stories. How many of you remember getting into your elders, your parents, your grandmothers, your mother's laps, your sister's laps, and saying, tell me a story, right? All of us do. We all crave stories because actually there's nothing but stories. Everything around you is stories. Every day. It has to be the story, isn't it? So guys, what I'm trying to tell you is, that is not, reality is stories. You don't know what the reality is. It's the stories that your mind has weaved. So create narratives, create stories. Are we together? And yes. How do you do that? See, here's the thing. A story is not necessarily non-factual, right? In other words, it cannot just, it need not be, you have to distinguish between a story that is just fantastic, made up of fairies and things like that. Scientific stories, and that's the beauty of it, scientific stories have the quality of narrative, but is completely grounded in truth and data, right? Cosmos. Right? All of us in the United States, for example, have watched Cosmos. And in India, I don't know how many of us, in India also it was broadcast. Cosmos we have seen. But did you notice that through Cosmos, there was this beautiful narrative? I mean, we are looking at the most dead of all things. We are looking at some cosmic dust, right? Billions of, like literally millions of light years away, of absolute irrelevance to your existence. Isn't it? And yet, what does a narrative quality do? It captures the imagination of children and people all around the world, so that space exploration remains one of the most well-funded things, right? In every culture, in every scientific culture. Isn't it? So that's the power of narrative, guys. You can take what looks dead and light it up with narrative. Narrative, and by the way, I very strongly believe it. My entire teaching approach is based on a narrative style, or I try to that. How many of you, by the way, felt that? Right? It is narrative because you remember. All the research shows we remember stories, we don't remember facts. We forget facts. So narration is important. And you have seen you have experienced that. When I teach you, do you think I'm just telling fairy tales, or I'm telling you correct technical matter? I am telling you matter. But to interleave, first of all, have a narrative quality and borrow from the stories of people. Right? So when I tell you regression is one thing, but when you bring in the life of Galton and you talk about regression towards the mean in the human population and things like that, it has a different meaning, right? It's a different context. These words mean something then. Right? So always humanize your scientific knowledge, because the more you humanize it, the more you contextualize it and ground it in people's lives. Yes. I have that book. Yeah, I think you mentioned that. Yes, I have that. Yes. Yeah. He has written a book on everything. Now he's come up with a book on computer science. Same author, and physics and so forth. See that, exactly. I'll show you guys this book. He's referring to a book. It's actually on my bookshelf. What it does is, and people have done that. See, math is supposed to be the most scared and hated subject. And so mathematicians have tried very hard to humanize it. Right? I hope I have tried to humanize it with all the stories I told you. So they are wonderful, wonderful books in which they show you one result of mathematics, the life behind it, the beauty of that thing, what is its applicability, and so forth. And one page each, 100 of those, right? So something like that, 1 or 2 pages each. It's very interesting, actually. So have that. See, that is a mark of a great technical writing. So let me share that book, guys, with you. You guys can read that. So I'm going to share, by the way, 2 or 3 books with you. Reading material for today will be, read, for example, pick one of these guys. I was going to say Martin Fowler. I should have thought more and created a bit more. There is a lovely book. It's too, I suppose, late. If you guys want to see absolutely brilliant narration and technical lives, read a book which is recent. It's called Figuring. It's about the lives of some of the great scientists. It starts with of all people, Kepler, who I like very much. And you'll be surprised how much of science he anticipated before Newton. Right? Figuring is a recent book. It's rather a thick book. And if you get the voice recording, the audible recording, it is with a British accent. So you have to be familiar with that or like it. And you can get the book. You can go to my room and get the book. It is about the sheer poetry, even when you're talking about the life of scientific people. Figuring. Figuring. If there is one book in recent, yes. It's a very good book. There is another book that I will share with you. Then there are articles. For example, the article by Martin Fowler. Some of the articles are very good, actually. Well-written articles, and they're all very technical. So today, take time, guys, to just absorb, to read it in the first half, to know that writing is a non-trivial thing. It is not that you do your work and then you wrap it up with a wrapping paper of some English words and present it. Right? That's not what it is. Writing is marvelous in its own right. This is worth looking at. This math book that I was talking about, I'll share it and read a couple of chapters from that. And I have there is a book of very good writing, though it is not the format in which I want you to write it, because that doesn't contain a lot of computer science or anything. But if you want to see some good, I'm just giving you references to look at. One of them is a mathematician's apology. It's a very thin book, Mathematician's Apology. It is by G.H. Hardy. Who was this guy? G.H. Hardy. He was the greatest mathematician of Britain in his own time, and he was the person who discovered Ramanujan. Very, very nice personality, leading mathematician in Cambridge, and he did that. It is to his character that when he was asked, "What is your greatest achievement?" Guess what he said? To have discovered Ramanujan. Right? But yeah, he said that. But that would be okay, except that you realize he is the leading mathematician of England saying that. Right? He's a great, great number theorist. But his language is just absolutely beautiful and autobiographical. Right? It's a very good book to read. A Mathematician's Apology. I think this should be enough to give you a style. If you want, see, here's the thing. Obviously, you want to cover a lot in a day, and this is a very thin book. This, you can read a chapter or two. What you can do, see if there's a free chapter of this available. Whole book is available? It must be pirated. Right? Okay. Okay. Knowing how hard, today you'll learn, guys, how hard it is to write well. So I hope it will dissuade you from ever pirating a book. Right? You'll feel like paying the poor author his $3 or $4 that he gets from each book. Avoid plagiarism. Yeah, Figuring Martin, Mathematician's Apology. Right. Of course, Carl Sagan of the Cosmos fame is a master of narration, scientific narration. Feynman lectures, of course, Feynman lectures. Carl Sagan. But Feynman lectures. And the last one that I was going to talk about, which again is not technical writing, it's actually quite far from technical writing, but by a highly technical person, one of the most celebrated professors of Carnegie Mellon, right, is this very touching thing called The Last Lecture. Right? He interleaves, and it's a very humanizing aspect of computer science, of what he has done and what his life has been, The Last Lecture. You can listen to it online. I think it's now freely available online. You can listen to it as video or as read the book. The reason I would always encourage you to read is because in reading, you can highlight. And I'll tell you what I have been doing personally, guys. I have been in love with words in every language. I love English literature, right? I love Hindi literature. Yeah? So, for example, in Hindi, when I read a poetry, Charu Chandra ki chanchal kirne khel rahi hai jal thal mein. Anybody remembers that from India? Right? You remember that. I love Urdu poetry. Yes, I do. Slowly. But my spellings are terrible. I read it, but it's terrible spelling. I do read Urdu. I mean, of course, I grew up in speaking Urdu. Right? I love Sanskrit and Pali. Right? So these are great classics, and I'm trying to teach myself Tibetan because I want to read the poet Milarepa in the original, the great, the equivalent of Kabir. Right? And of course, Hindi is including Braj and Avadi. Right? So I have been fond of languages, but what I do is not just read them. I have diaries filled with my favorite sentences and phrases from those people. And as you make your own little diaries or journals full of their writings, and what I do is whenever I come across a beautiful paragraph, I will sit down, take a pen, and in the best calligraphy that I can, I'll write it in my journal, and I'll memorize it, so that in these languages, I can recite to you from chapters, paragraphs from these authors. Now, you may say, well, what is it? But it's sort of part of the treasure you accumulate in your life, right? When I was young, I wanted to be a writer and a poet. Then I also loved mathematics, so I had a confusion. Which direction should I go? Science, math and science, or writing? Then I one day thought deeply, and I said that, see, I come from very humble origins, right? And of course, it was a third world country, India, poor country. India was really poor in those days, and I come from very humble origins. If I went into writing and I turned out to be a mediocre writer, I was going to starve. If, on the other hand, I went into math and science and I became a mediocre engineer, I would still be doing pretty well. Right? So, well, so many 30 years later, it seems that I've become a mediocre engineer and I have a good living. And I pursue, I admire writing, other people's writings. I hardly get time to write. The only time I try to write, it becomes yet one more lab manual. so that is that, guys. So that speaks to that. Now a technical aspect. Your article should have some technical aspects. One is that have a glossary. Do not use an abbreviation. The first time you use an abbreviation, use the full form, put the abbreviation in brackets, and thereafter in the rest of the article use the abbreviation. But do not ever start just blindly with the abbreviation, assuming everybody will understand, right? Even very common things like a recurrent neural network, RNN. The moment you just limit yourself to RNN, you have limited your audience, right? You start with recurrent neural networks and then say in bracket RNN, and for the rest of the article say RNN. It's basic common sense, right? You do that. Always do this. First time, give full form plus abbreviation. Then use abbreviation. Does that make sense? Right? That should be a rule that's it. If you just follow this simple rule, you're done. Right? Second rule that I would say is, look at your paragraph and your sentences. Look at how long your sentences are and see if the length of your sentences vary or not. If all your sentences are equally long or short, it is rather dull writing. Good writing sort of cycles through various lengths of sentences. Short thoughts, long thoughts, different thoughts. Right? Each thought as a sentence will have different length. Sometimes it so happens that they do have it, but quite often when we have that, it's because we have fallen into a groove and we can't come out of it. So, sentence lengths. Avoid cliches. Oh goodness, I've forgotten the spelling of cliche. Cliche. C-H-E, cliche. Okay. Avoid cliche. Right? Certainly avoid cliche, guys. Don't say the obvious. Right? Like if your narrative starts with, "It was a dark and gloomy night," forget it. Right? Don't start with cliches. The other thing is, when you start a paragraph, there are two simple forms I'll tell you about a paragraph. I mean, see, at the end of it, right, rules in literature are meant to be forgotten after you have mastered them. It's a very interesting thing. You master a rule, and it helps you grow. And then you transcend the rules. You forget those rules. Are we together? Right? It's a way of learning about it. So here is a rule of paragraph that I learned when I was a kid. As a kid, I learned that paragraph can have two basic structures. The first line states the thesis. Right? First sentence is the thesis sentence. The rest of the paragraph substantiates it. Are we together? Right? Rest of the paragraph substantiates it. The second style, what is the other style? Could somebody tell? No, I'm coming to that. No. If you start with the thesis sentence, the last can just dangle on. What is the other style is, I suppose what is you lead towards a conclusion, and your thesis should become self-evident in the last sentence, right? Lead the reader till you take her to the now self-evident. It shouldn't be self-evident before. Thesis. I'll give an example of that. Dickens, for example, starts by saying, "It was the best of times, it was the worst of times." Dramatic statements. But then you ask, where is it leading to? Right? This and that, and he goes on. Right? Then he ends with it and says, "In short, it was so much like the present time that the noisiest authorities insisted on describing it in superlative degrees only." Right? And he's talking after the French Revolution in the 1800s. Is that true today? You look at the politics. Any given time, it is the people who are supportive, our president would say, "It is the best of times. Finally, we got a real president, the greatest ever." The people who are opposed to it moan that, "Oh my goodness, we are going to the dogs." Completely, there's never been a worse time, right? Or a worse president. So it puts perspective. When you read a paragraph like that and you remember it, it gives you it makes you pause and think that here is an author who is making this truth statement more than 100 years ago, 150 years ago. And he was referring to a time even before that, and he was making this profound observation. And that observation is truly profound, isn't it? So the concluding statement has a very strong punchline, right? So it is the now self-evident thesis or punchline. And punchlines are very powerful if you can pull it off, right? The final punchline that you can get to is very powerful to be able to do that. So guys, practice it. See if all of these things are leave on the board one by one, right? Try as a group and see if you can construct paragraphs like that. It will make you pause and remember that writing is not a mechanical act. It's a creative act. And you can do that. So with that, guys, I'm just going to... now I'll take a break. I need to order your lunch. Or maybe the lunch is coming. So this is it. Huh? This is your basic structure. By the way, are you guys finding this useful, or has this been self-evident so far? Right? I hope you find it useful because today writing is important and I'll come and sit with you guys and do that. The other thing is prefer simplicity over complexity. If it can be said in a simpler way, say it in a simpler way. Do not use complicated words from the thesaurus. Like, you don't look up the meaning of a word and find the most esoteric synonym of it and use it. Are we together? Because why? Why should I not use the most esoteric synonym of a word and use it? Amongst the many reasons, it will violate a basic rule which says never try to impress. Are we together? Never try to impress. And not only that, every word has a particular place where it is well used. When you just pick it up from a thesaurus and stick it in there, most likely you're using it inappropriately. And it's jarring. You have a certain tone, and now the tone just suddenly, it's like, you're driving on the road and then suddenly the road is dug up, right? And you get through a lot of those broken things. You shouldn't do that. It should be a flow. So the most important thing in writing is the voice and the flow. If the reader can just flow, if she can just read it without the least effort, but gain insights and have a pleasure in reading, that is good writing. And that's the one thing. Is it a pleasure at the end of it to read what you have? Like, is it a pleasure? Is it a pleasure to read what you have? Okay? That's it. So I'll stop with that. Now, here is the thing. Scientific writing has a certain format, a life cycle. After the TLDR, let me just say TLDR, which you write the last, at the end of it. You have introduction, which has background, what you will do. Simply put, it is the mountain and it is the sand that you add. Sand to the mountain. Sand grains to the mountain. Simply. Does that make sense, guys? Sand grains to the mountain. You first describe the mountain so that you invite people into that field, into your area of interest. Right? You say that I'm very, very interested in how we can use AI to do whatever. To distinguish, for example, one of the students, Ben, did, between electric guitars and acoustic guitars. And why is that worth? And what people have done. And people have used AI to do this and that in image processing and so forth. Right? But before that, just say that CNNs have been used for image processing a lot. What are CNNs? Very brief introduction. And then you say, I'm going to use it to tell the distinction between these two types of guitars. And then you explain why it is a problem complex enough to be solved with the AI rather than something very trivial. Then you can speak about a few representative images where it is really hard. Right? And then you can do that and say, then it begs the most obvious question, why can't a human being look at the picture and do that? Why will I need AI? Why will I upload a picture to AI? So you have to say that sometimes it's not obvious what something is, and a human may not have a good accuracy. Whatever it is, you create the context, you create the background and what you will do. In context of what others have done. So let us say that somebody else has gone and tried to classify, I don't know, some other wood instrument, right? Drums or whatnot. Refer to that. See what approach that guy took. Or maybe somebody tried to do it with guitars. But you're taking a slightly different approach. Talk about it. Be very specific that what value you add to the existing body of work. That is most important. Don't ever try to project that, see what great work I did. It's meaningless. None of us ever do great work, not even Einstein. Yeah. Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. Mixed up cereals, yes. That is it, exactly the context, the reason for that. Yeah. Yeah, that's, you show it to, actually, why don't you share it with us? Yeah. Yeah, put it on Slack. Hmm. Yes. Yeah, yeah, sure. So, guys, do that. See, we say, right, and we always talk about great towering geniuses as though they did everything. You go back and look at the history of great people like Einstein, you realize how much of their work was foreshadowed by the work of all of these great people before them, right? Lorentz already had the equations of special relativity. He just didn't understand what it means. The time, you know, the time dilation and length contraction and everything was there. They just didn't understand it, right? Poincaré, etc., had already thought through 4 dimensions. A lot of work had been anticipated. That is not to undermine the absolute brilliance of Einstein, because none of them understood. The key insight was missing. What Einstein brought in was just a key insight. But the scaffolding was already there, right? It was, the ground was ready for that insight. So you have to talk about all the people who prepared the ground for the insight that came, right? So it's important to do that, guys. Never try to have a hero complex. That's what this refers to. Introduction. Then you talk about method. Method is something we engineers are absolutely marvelous at, right? The moment we are all about implementation, isn't it? This implementation, that, and how nice implementation we did and all that. So I won't speak much about it. You guys have been doing implementation, right? So it's the method. Then discuss your results. Discuss your results in detail. It's the thing that I've been making you practice. What did I say? Write some code, have some results, talk about it. Right? I've been trying to help you do that in your Jupyter notebooks. Talk about it. Everything you see has to be talked about. Otherwise, what is it? Right? And then finally, there has to be the conclusion. The conclusion. And conclusion always is a misnomer, because you just say that this seems to work or something like that. But remember, research is never concluded. So conclusion should always show all the unfinished states, and therefore all directions of future research. What can this lead to? Every door that you open and every room you enter opens the doors to more rooms, right? Has doors to more rooms that you can open. That's the nature of research, right? So talk about that. Speak. What is the way ahead? You must do that way ahead. And usually what happens, as people who do research know, the first paper in their life is the hardest. After that, the rest of their life, they keep on opening the doors pointed to by the first paper. Right? It becomes too easy after a little while. Right? So this is it. Today, you guys are going, for how many of you this will be your first technical blog? For most of you guys. And trust me that the first one, if you do well, it will be hard. But if you do well, after that, you would love technical writing. Right? It is our cup of tea. Really, we are all engineers. We do it. We just have to tell the story. Right? So guys, do that. What I want you to do is, let me set some goals for today. First, guys, go check out what is quality. How many of you have never seen Cosmos or Carl Sagan or one of these things? If you have never, I would just go and do that. It looks pretty old now. I think it was the 70s or 80s when it was made. 80s. It's still worth watching. Watch the first episode, right? And see how it captures your mind about space. Or I think there's a remake of Cosmos. Yeah, exactly. Go and watch the new one, right? Much better, huh? Okay, yeah. Yeah, just go and read that, guys. Huh? Do that. Read more to the point. What you are writing is, this is your standard. You're writing to this, right? Go read a Martin Fowler article. And if you really want to see a beauty of language, simple language, read a mathematician's apology. Very simple language, but very touching, right? And a good voice to it. Very, I find it's very moving, actually. It's very moving. Likewise, the last lecture is very moving. Figuring is not just great writing, but actually it is very rich writing. So it may take you aback that somebody has put so much effort in writing all the sentences, because each of the sentences in that book are brilliantly constructed, like very well constructed. So read Figuring. So I would suggest that from now till about 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock, just read, guys, just read. Are we together? Then what you do is decide as a team, each team, what is the technical matter that you will read the blog on, right? So action, work. First is read. Read and talk. Ask yourself why, collectively, why do you like this? Ask each other, what did you see into this? Right? I'm asking you to read only the first chapters or first few paragraphs of each of them. Do that. Right? Then what you do is pick a data set that you will write about, right? Look into the historic context. Historical context. And social relevance and contemporary relevance. Then decide on at this moment, right, this is what I'll ask. I'll expect you not to show some writing, but just to decide on your main message or burden. What is it that we are going to do? Right? And then decide who are you talking to. The most important question I'll ask you is, who are you talking to? Who is this? Who's the person? Describe the person. How does the person look? Long hair, right? With a mustache and a ponytail and a motorcycle. What is it? Right? What's the educational background? What is the person's profession? Who are you talking to? What is your level? Right? Establish the level. Establish your level very, very clearly. Right? And then sketch out. Just make a sketch or storyboard. Storyboard it. Right? So when you create stories, guys, there are people who have studied stories a lot, and there is something that may or may not be relevant. I will ask you, okay, read about, one more thing that I want you to read about is the hero's journey. And think its relevance to your project, current project. Right? What is the hero's journey? How many of you have heard that phrase, the hero's journey? Yes, it's a profound thing by Joseph Campbell, the great mythologist, who studied all the great mythologies and made a most remarkable discovery. He discovered, for example, that all mythologies are one story, right? They all, what is the Krishna of India and the Achilles of Greeks and mythologies in Greek and the Christian mythologies, they're actually all one underlying story told in different voices and different cultures. It's literally one story. And that story is about a hero. These are heroes, right? Achilles, Hercules, or whatever. And these great people, right? And Krishna and, Christ and whatnot. All of these are great, great guys. They are considered social heroes or cultural heroes, cultural icons, superheroes, whatever word we want to use. But their lives, their stories about them, they have a certain pattern to them. Right? And that pattern is the quintessential pattern of a lot of storytelling, the narrative aspect of it. Right? And that is the hero's journey. I'd like you to just read about the hero's journey. Now, there are all sorts of diagrams. If you just Google the word hero's journey, you'll see a figure, a circle, right? And what it means is that a hero embarks on a journey based on some inspiration. In the beginning, is very charged up with passion and so forth. Then you are in the hero is in the belly of the beast. The going gets tough, right? Reality hits. It's really, really tough and dark and gloomy. And then in the midst of all of the struggle comes a mentor or a inspiration or a guide who takes the hero out of the darkness into that and to a final successful outcome. Right? There is think about that. You'll realize that it has a very strong resonance with your own life and whenever you do a hard project. How many of you have that? You'll start with a strong purpose and then the going gets tough. Right? And you struggle a lot, and after a little while you realize that you can't do it alone. You need some help. And that's when you catch hold of a guide who takes you forward, right? And then gets you out of the belly of the beast, and then you're again strong and superhero. And you march off to a victory and so forth. Right? There's a lot more to it, but read that. And then also think about it as a very small resonance to any article you write, You remember that for the reader, it's a hero's journey. In the beginning, the introduction, we all read the introductions of papers, looks very good. Then you go into the methods and other things and the going gets really tough, isn't it? We can't make head and tail of the notation or the code. Right? And at the end of it, we need some help, we need some guidance to go out. So you are the guide, as a writer, you are the guide. So think about it this way, somebody just discovered that there has been a breakthrough in deep neural networks. You go and look at the archive paper, and what is the archive paper like? It just makes you feel like an idiot. It makes me feel like an idiot, right? So what do? That's when you say, okay, I need help. I do need to master this. It's a great thing. I'm highly inspired to learn this, but I need a bit of a helping hand. And then there's a guide who comes and helps you out, Does that. And what is that guide typically? It's a friend talking to you and explaining it's not that hard, This is what this guy is trying to say, right? Or some article you read in some website, which sort of simplifies it, makes it accessible to you, and then helps you master that difficult topic. There's a resonance of these things in all our lives, guys, all around us. Right? So follow that. Remember, you're like the guide. You're taking people in the belly of the beast, these great heroes who are struggling. You're taking these heroes over to success. That has to be the nature of your articles, right, overall. So anyway, this is it, guys. I'll stop here. I've been talking now for an hour and a half. Any questions? How many of you feel we can do it? Half of you. You guys will do it, guys. Writing is, if you can write code, you can surely write English. Right? So go at it, but you need some structure, otherwise it becomes broad. I'll leave it at that. Do all of those things, guys. Sketch out a storyboard. By 4 o'clock, we'll just look at your storyboard. We'll all present our sketches and stories, right? And what we are going to do. Make sense? And by midnight, we'll finish our blog and get out. And I'll take a video of you guys. Right? Yes, in pictures. Where's that? Lot of my? What claims? Yeah. No, you go. Should I stop it? Hang on.